Welcome to Sustainability Now, an exploration of technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for socially conscious entrepreneurs and individuals interested in responsible stewardship of the planet. Sustainability Now covers food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, Technologies and Paradigms to Shape a World That Works. So glad you're here to join us today. I'm your host, Mira Rubin, and I am thrilled to introduce my friend, Nora Chahbazi. Nora is the founder and president of EBLI, Evidence-Based Literacy Instruction, and the Ounce of Prevention Reading Center in Flushing, Michigan. Nora is on a mission to teach the world to read. And she's trained thousands of teachers and tens of thousands of students in her center and in classrooms and online at all different grade levels. Nora has been a presenter at numerous educational conferences and was interviewed by Maya Angelou on the Oprah radio show. That is so cool. That's amazing. In a show that was highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And she's also been on CNN and featured on ABC's Detroit 2020. So Nora, we are so excited to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mira. I'm really honored and very happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Me too. This will be great. So before we even get started, I think our listeners might be wondering why on a show about sustainability we might be talking about literacy. And actually it's through knowing you that I became conscious of the fact that literacy is really a social justice issue. And I thought it would be helpful if you could have people understand some of the statistics, really frightening social statistics that are tied to illiteracy in this country. Because I think it's an invisible problem for those that can read. It's kind of an invisible problem. We're probably not aware that we know people that can't read. So go for it.
Exactly. Well, and I agree. I mean, I was one of those people way back 20 years ago before my own child was a struggling reader, and she was in gifted and talented because her high scores in math. So I didn't, I couldn't comprehend, like, how is this child of a doctor and a nurse, which I was at the time, that is a struggling reader, that has had every advantage and been read to every day of her life. So a lot of people don't understand that only about 35 to 40% of fourth graders are proficient in reading in our country, and that over 30 million adults are reading at a third grade level or below. I mean, it's just
That's horrifying.
It's horrifying. And they're not just people that you would think, oh, these are, disadvantaged people or people who are poor or whatever you may think. These are doctors. I have taught doctors, lawyers, millionaire businessmen and women, all kinds of people many college educated people who have never read a book in their life. The oldest person I ever taught was an 82-year-old who had retired as the city planner of Los Angeles, California, had never read a book in his life. He had a master's degree and he had never read a book.
How does that happen? How can that even happen?
Well, many of these people are tremendously brilliant, my daughter included. They are often tremendously hands-on, creative, very personable people, very bright. They are really good with simultaneous processing, sizing up a room and figuring out a situation. A lot of your artists, a lot of your builders, a lot of your architects, a lot of accountants, those type of people, and real creative type of people. I would say almost none, if not none of them, are reading to their potential. And when I say, subliterate is a term that I use, that they're not reading nearly as well as they could. Now, this gentleman, the 82-year-old, he got by. They get people, they're very clever about getting people to help them, very clever about not revealing these struggles. And again, it's not that they can't read. He could read some, this gentleman. He said, I would get a third of a way through a book, I'd have to go back and keep rereading. And I read so slowly that I forgot what happened at the beginning. So I never finished it. but they're also typically really hard workers. Everyone who's watching this and everyone in this country knows many people, even though they may not know it, who are really hugely struggling with reading. Sometimes they'll say, oh, I don't spell so right, or I don't have, well, or I don't have my glasses, or I'm not that great of a writer. All these types of things that are many people living in your own homes, you wouldn't even know, because this is a really shame-filled secret that a lot of people hold close to their heart and don't want anybody to, it feels very vulnerable for people to know about it. So they start very young being able to hide it, and then they get better and better, and so that their whole life kind of revolves around the fact that reading and communicating through literacy is difficult for them, and we have 85% of our people in the legal system are struggling readers, typically third grade and below. So, and it becomes, there's a number that I had pulled out, $300 billion annually that costs the cost of illiteracy and subliteracy to our country every year, $300 billion, because children who are struggling readers, only because they haven't been taught, then become adults who are struggling readers that learn coping mechanisms, but a lot of their life's time and energy are spent focusing on how to cope and hide this, shameful secret is what is often thought of.
What a way to live.
Yeah.
Your heart breaks.
Mm-hmm.
So how you said that they're not taught, but the truth is we are taught how to read in school. And so what's the problem? Where's the disconnect?
Well, everyone is typically taught something about reading in school, for sure. But the most horrifying thing to me that I found out through these years of, learning on the job, because I don't have a formal education in education. I have 7 years of college education in nursing. I was a neonatal ICU nurse, but I don't have any formal education in reading instruction, that type of thing. Though I would, many people have said you probably have several doctorates from all that I have learned, but not through the education system. But the most horrifying thing I found out, and this was told to me by a college professor who taught, people who are becoming teachers, is that teachers aren't taught in college how to teach reading. I was told that way back before I even taught my own daughter over 20 years ago. And I thought, that can't be true. I mean,
that makes no sense.
A little dramatic, and she had been a professor at a huge university for over 3 decades. And she said, no, the research says exactly what you're supposed to do to teach anyone to read to their highest potential. It is not taught to teachers in colleges. And actually, I was so insistent on making that happen to teach my students what the research says to, teach anybody to read, that I got basically kicked out kind of the, she said I had tenure, so I didn't get fired, but people who had been my friends for 30 years or more wouldn't speak to me anymore. I mean, the uproar was tremendous. So that's a huge problem. So we have teachers who are paying a lot of money thinking that they're getting what they need to be able to teach students. And then they go and they have half or sometimes more than half of their class, easily 30% to over 50 of their class who are struggling readers. The higher grade level to teach, the more struggling readers they have, because there's more and more of a load that you're supposed to have of words you're supposed to know and that type of thing as you go up in the grades. So these teachers don't have the tools that they need. They keep going and getting more tools that don't work well. So of course they think there's something wrong with a child is what it comes to. Well, there has to be something here. I am working my tail off, doing everything I could possibly do, that I paid all this money for to get my undergrad, my master's in reading, all kinds of stuff, and it's not working. So it never occurs to them, like it really probably shouldn't, that, wow, maybe it's because I don't have the tools, I don't have what I need to be able to teach these children. It's the tools that are defective, not the child. And so it then becomes a big, because after I taught my daughter, it took me 3 hours to teach her to read, and she was reading chapter books. And
now, wait. There are people who are going through college, through master's programs, and they are coming to teach kids how to read, and they're not able to teach kids how to read. And you taught your daughter to read in 3 hours?
True story. I know it sounds like swampland in Florida, but yes, I did. I did. I read this book. Actually, the professor from Michigan State that I had talked to, the one I was telling you about, she had a reading center, and my mom had twin 12-year-old neighbors that were in special ed, and they went to her reading center over in the Lansing area. And in 12 hours of instruction, they had no longer qualified for special ed. And I'm like, well, that's kind of crazy too. So when I called this lady, I said, what are you teaching? Is it phonics? Is it whole language? Teachers are either taught one of these is great and the other is horrible. Either way. And she said it's neither. There's good things, of course, in both of those, some components, but the majority are going to actually be even more detrimental to kids, especially struggling readers. And the research shows what you need to do. So she told me of a book called Why Our Children Can't Read and What You Can Do About It. It's by Diane McGinnis. She's a cognitive psychologist.
Let me just interrupt you for a sec. Is that still available in print?
It is. Yep.
So we'll have a link to that on the website, and any other resources that we discuss, you'll be able to find on the podcast notes page of the sustainabilitynow.global website. Sorry.
Okay. Yes. The book is still, and I've read hundreds of books, maybe more than hundreds since then. It's still my favorite book on reading because she was just very straight out. It was first thing, and I had been researching for 6 months what to do to help my daughter. So I had been to reading conferences, I had read research, I had read books, and I got this book and it's like, finally something makes sense. And so after reading it, in 3 hours, I taught my daughter, who could memorize any story in school. She could memorize the whole entire story. She could come home and read it without even having the book. But she couldn't read a sentence that was pulled out of it. She could not read anything she hadn't already memorized. So she came home with a little Bailey Schoolhouse chapter book and read the entire thing. After 3 hours of instruction, by the way, read the whole thing cover to cover, told me all about it. She's never had any reading difficulty since. She's actually getting married next month. And she's 27 years old in college for, honors courses and all, just no problems. Her spelling took 2 years to remediate because, that's always harder takes a little bit longer to undo that poor spelling. So I taught her in 3 hours. Then I started teaching other people's kids in my home, and then it kind of snowballed to, opening this reading center and creating my own system and all kinds of crazy stuff. So the thing of it is the answer is very simple and straightforward. People will come to us. I mean, we see kids in my reading center. It's an average of 9.5 hours. Some are 2 hours, some are 35. But mostly, if especially when people are going to a remediation place, we are teaching classroom teachers mostly. That's our main focus, to teach classroom teachers who teach all children, because my daughter would not have become, one of those who needs to have Title I or a pull-out remediation thing, but to teach all students. But at our reading center, people come from all over the country where they have been oftentimes for years in remediation programs that they haven't made much progress, certainly not to grade level or above. So it's an average of 9.5 hours. We get about 2 grade level gains in that amount of time, but that's an average. Our kindergarten kids, as well as our 10th grade people, the older kids get a lot more gains, and younger, of course, go a little bit slower. But it's not rocket science. It's not as complicated as everybody likes to think, or the education establishment really likes to make you think. There's a lot of publishing companies and a lot of places that are making a ton of money that, $67.8 billion that we spent between 2000 and 2010 with No Child Left Behind. Most of that is going to the publishing companies. It's not going to the teachers. It's not going to, it's a lot of stuff that schools buy thinking that the stuff is going to teach the kids when the teachers deliver it to them, but it's not. What we say is teachers are what teach the children and the adults, and the teachers need to have the tools that they need to be able to be, get their students, whatever age they may be, to their highest potential. And we're talking above grade level, highest, not just like, we might make a little bit of gains. If you're in, like my third daughter, who I taught before she went to school because I was paranoid, she was in first grade and she was at a 7th grade level in first grade. She could read. Oh my
heavens.
Yeah. And so it's the English code is complex, but it's also, there's a logic to it. So when you teach the logic of the code, anybody can break it. It's just like the CIA. You teach the code, you can figure it out. So when you teach them how to do the code without a lot of rules and exceptions to rules, or asking them to guess words or look at pictures to be able to, instead of reading the words, when you teach the code and you help them, crack the code and then utilize it so they're automatic, it frees up everything so that they can then comprehend and enjoy what they're reading and do the work of school along with actually enjoying what they're reading.
That's amazing. So, let's talk about the code. because you've broken it down into something very systematic. And when you first exposed it to me, it was a revelation. I read okay. I think I'm a good reader, actually,
Yes.
but breaking the English language down into these component pieces, it had never occurred to me. So I'm wondering if maybe you could lay that out for our listeners a little bit so they get some idea of this magic power you have.
I will try to do it with words. It's a little more challenging with words. And I can say too, I've always been a great reader. I've always been a great writer too. I could read about 300 words a minute the first time I tested. The average person is about 250. So I'm already above. And since I've been doing EBLI and teaching EBLI, which I do, extensively, of course, I now read about 425 words a minute. So I'm a tremendously fast and better reader. And words like convenience and hors d'oeuvre and words that I didn't, definitely was another weird one for me, that I, sometimes struggled with using the EBLI process. I will never misspell them again in my life.
Wow.
So that's important to note, that EBLI works phenomenally with struggling readers, but EBLI also works phenomenally with all readers, with great readers too. So, but how the code works is that the English language came about by, I say us, but it wasn't me. Those guys over in England, Samuel Johnson, and there was a guy before him that actually borrowed from a bunch of different countries for our spellings. So they came up with a spelling system because it wasn't working well, the pictographs on caves and, communicating that way. So we needed a system that we would all agree on. So they came up with the English alphabetic code. But what makes it complex is the fact that we plucked some from the Danish and some from the French and some from the Germans and some from the Romans. So we have a lot of different unique pieces of the code, but there's a pattern to them. So there's three concepts that are really make our language, in the code of our language, unique. And one is that in English, when we say a sound out of our mouth, a sound can be spelled with one letter, like the letter in me. Okay, that's a one-letter spelling for a sound. A sound could be spelled with two letters. So you have ch, like in chip. That's a two-letter spelling for one sound. Or you have the E spelling, EA, like in eat. That's a two-letter spelling. So sounds that we say can be spelled with one letter. They can be spelled with two letters. Three letters can spell a sound. So if you look at the word high, like I can jump very high, you have h, and then IGH is the symbol that represents the sound I. So three letters can spell a sound. And then also four letters. So OUGH in though, that's the spelling for O. EIGH in eight, okay, that's the spelling for A. So the first concept that makes English tricky is 1, 2, 3, or 4 letters can spell a sound. We teach our kids in kindergarten and beyond about the one-letter spellings. They know that A is a and B is ba, for the most part. But then they go to read the word eight and they start reading a, ga, ha, ta. That doesn't make any sense. So that's a problem. So we teach that in a way that's very explicit, and then we go for the implicit learning of now you're going to apply it. And so we don't have to teach the whole crazy code, which is good news too. We teach so much of it explicitly, and then they apply it to the rest of the code. The second thing about English that is really a challenge is that we have about 40 sounds. If you look at research, they'll say 37 to 44 sounds in English. So I say about 40. About 40 sounds in English, and they all can be spelled in multiple ways. So if you think of the sound sh, if you look at the word shop or wish, all right, we have that SH for sh. In kindergarten, kids usually know that, first grade kids. But then there's 20 ways to spell the sound sh. So they know one. They go to spell nation, the TI is sh. They don't know that. They spell it with a SH. They're not sure about that. Special, CI is sh. Sugar, just the S is sh. In mission, the SSI is sh. So there's 20 ways to spell sh. So every sound, consonant and vowel, can be spelled in a number of ways, usually about 10. But the sound is the winner. So how do you deal with that? How do we deal with that when we're reading, and how do we deal with that when we're spelling? So EBLI teaches it, again, very explicitly, and then we apply it. So teach explicitly and apply it through reading and writing. So often reading it is taught, either teach the code or teach reading, but don't let the two combine. It's kind of like we have a car with here's the engine and here's the frame. You have to have them both together. So that's the second concept. The third concept is in English, which causes a lot of those phonics rules, like two vowels go walking, or all kinds of rules that are not consistent. Many of them work less than 50% of the time, but people are like, how else do we teach this? But then the rules cause confusion with the kids too. So this third concept and the way EBLI teaches it makes it very straightforward, which is nice. But this is that in English, if you're looking at the same exact letter, different sounds can go with it. So if you look at the letter A, it can be a like an at. It's a like in the word eight. But in my name, Nora, it's a. So a and a, those are the short and long sounds that people talk about. There's 7 other sounds that go with the letter A. It can be in Nora, or in father, or in wall, or in stomach. So there's 7 ways or 9 ways sounds that you say just for that one letter. Happens the same thing for consonants. So CH, you were asking me about my last name. How do you say that? Well, it's Chahbazi. So most people would think Chahbazi, like a ch like in chip, right? Or you were wondering, is it Chahbazi, like in school? Or the winner is sh. It's a sh for Chahbazi, because those 2 letters can be k, sh, or ch. So the same exact spelling, we have different sounds. Now, when you have that going on and nobody tells you about it, all you get are confusions, and a lot of people who hate reading and try to avoid it at all costs, which is tough when you're 12 years in school for 6-7 hours a day. So those concepts are unique, really. I mean, other languages have them to a degree, but not to the degree of English. And then we have to deal with big words, big multi-syllable words, which EBLI deals with. And then you have to have skills to be able to manage these concepts. So the skills are blending sounds together. So you say the sounds in my name, n, o, and then you put them together, Nora. So blending is just putting the sounds together. And again, we'll teach our kids this in kindergarten with words like cat and run and top, but we forget about words like directions and simultaneous and all that type of thing. So the blending sounds together, pulling sounds apart, or segmenting is one of the #1 things that correlate with comprehension. So what are the sounds in car? K, pulling each of those sounds apart with 1 second in between, hugely, it's also going to help you access the code to read it and write it, but also it's going to help with comprehension and fluency. So we do that, and they're teaching that more in little grades, in kindergarten and first grade especially, but they teach it just auditorily, not matching it with the code. So we have a very explicit process where you match it with the code. And then phoneme manipulation, where you pull a sound out or push another one in or move sounds around in words. So if somebody said my name as Nora, they'd pull out the A and push it in Nora. So those concepts and skills are the fabric of what EBLI is, and it's the foundation that almost every student and pretty much almost every teacher is missing. Or if they're not missing it completely, they have tremendous holes in it. So we really strengthen and focus on that with EBLI, but also we're big on accuracy. You don't get to guess words and put in what you think makes sense, and you don't get to spell them your own little whatever way you want to. We have to use the code that was created for us. So we apply it in reading and writing, and we apply it with accuracy. And so kids and adults move really far, really fast, because it makes sense, and it's also fun. We do a lot of work on whiteboards and all that kind of stuff. So
Nora, I'm with the statistics that you quoted, it's certain that there are people that are listening to this that know that they could improve their reading at the very least, and maybe learn how to read from the get-go. So I want to take this moment to ask you about resources for people and how do they get trained? What's available to them?
Okay. Our main focus, what we do, I mean, we have our reading center, but our main focus of what we do is we train teachers. Either we train them in person, or not just teachers, we train teachers, we train parents, we train volunteers, we train paraprofessionals. We train anyone who wants to teach somebody how to read. But that's more of a intensive. We have 3-day trainings that we're kind of fading out there in person, and it's a very intensive 3 days. We have a 7-week training that anyone from anywhere in the world can get access to, which is really exciting, to be able to teach anyone to read, whether they teach it in a whole classroom, which is the majority of our teachers, or if they teach in a small group or one-on-one special ed, it doesn't matter. So we have in-person and online options to teach the teachers who are going to be teaching the kids. And when I say teachers, I don't have a degree in education. When people say I'm not a teacher, well, I'm not a teacher either officially. I teach in thousands of classrooms, and I've taught countless people. But we've taught high school students. Anybody who is interested in teaching reading can be trained. But if you're wanting to learn as far as to what I say to parents or anyone who themselves want to become a better reader, we have some apps that we made, and our apps are for $4.99. So there's 2 that are beginning reading instruction. They're called EBLI Island and EBLI Space. EBLI Island has been used to as young as 3-year-old students, but it's also been used with adults who are non-readers. It is going to teach all of the the initial code, the 1-letter spellings and a few of the 2-letter spellings, and how to blend and segment and do all those kinds of things. And that's available on iPads, not iPhones, iPads and Android tablets or phones. And then on a continuation of that is EBLI Space, which is going to get into a little bit more teaching the sight words by sound, a lot of 2, 3, and 4-letter spellings, some multi-syllable words, always, and then putting them in the context of stories too. So that one is only available on iPads right now. It's being built for Android. But so those two are kind of our initial instruction, that we have whole schools and, you know, of their K1 using it for their little kids, parents really using that a lot. Then we have EBLI Sight Words Made Easy is what it's called. And that's going to teach you those concepts I talked about. It's going to actually have you experience those, you know, one of each of those. And then it's going to move into teaching all of your sight words by sound. Sight words are those words that little kids a lot of times are shown on flashcards to memorize, like what, when, that, those, of, for. And they flash them because they want them to learn them and be able to say them automatically, which we want them to also, but we never teach them by whole word flashcarding because they look a lot alike. What and what and when and went, they all look very much alike. Of, off, and for look very much alike. So this app teaches it by sound, and it even for teachers, adults, good readers, they're like, whoa, it kind of blows your mind when you get into that app because there's a lot of different code in there that you weren't familiar with. So that is what I would say to people who want to get somewhat better at or even faster reader, that type of thing. That would be the $4.99 app, and you can put as many people on one device as you want. And it also teaches the homophones, so like there, and there, which is one of my pet peeves that everybody messes up. We teach those by sound, and then we put them into writing, so it also has writing and spelling in it. That app is just like a gold mine, really. So anybody who, for their own personal self, or they want to dabble, or they want it for their child, I would say go there. If you're talking as somebody reading at a 2nd grade level and older, Sight Words Made Easy. And somebody reading below that, EBLI Island and EBLI Space.
Beautiful. So again, we're going to have links to these resources on the show notes page and our website at sustainabilitynow.global. Wow. So let's just talk about how you got to this point. You talked about your daughter's journey, and what I want to talk about is some of the hurdles that you've encountered and how you've overcome them, because we're all about transformation and
Yes.
how that happens.
I mean, I actually had been kind of in a state of depression at the point when my daughter was struggling, and I thank her because she totally pulled me out of it really quickly. But I just didn't know, like, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? I mean, what's the point here? What am I up to? And you know, we'd been in the military, and our whole life had changed, and it was just a really kind of a dark spot in my life. And so it was like something just yanked me out of the deep and pulled me into the light of, this is what you're supposed to be doing, lady. And it wasn't even a thought or a plan. It just has kind of kept pulling me along. And I couldn't quit doing this even if I wanted to. It's too much of a passion and a mission and a desperation for the suffering. I mean, I saw and experienced the suffering of my own child, but the suffering that I've seen over the last 20 years, that's not necessary. That's, to me, the most horrible thing. This is preventable. The suffering of teachers, bless their hearts, the suffering of students, kids that come to us from all over the country, and adults that come to us that are just literally, their hearts are broken. Their souls are ripped out. They think they're dumb. They think they're stupid. They think they're broken. They think they can't. And so, but there's been many people, you know, I come from outside the system, which is, you know, many people inside the system have said to me, how did you ever even get into any schools, much less over 350 of them? And this might sound corny, and I understand that, but truly the only answer I can say is divine intervention. It really hasn't been me. It's been meant to be. So the places who are open, and some that are not as open, but mostly places that are open, that's who are attracted to us. We don't really advertise. I haven't in 20 years, and I'm starting to change that. But because I thought, how can it be that here I am, this nurse, you know, who's a single mom with no education and no background in business or anything? How can I have the answer? How can this be that good of an answer that it's really going to help anybody anybody, if they can speak, to be able to learn to read. And it does, and it has. So sometimes I think any system has issues, and the educational system is not, immune to that. So trying to work within a system while working outside the system is not a walk in the park. There are many times where I want to put my head down and cry, and run screaming from the room too. But I think there's so many people who want what we have. There's so many people who are desperate to help children and also desperate to help teachers. There are those that have a really hard time changing, and they've learned what they learned in the college and the college system and the whole system throughout, and they just are in their comfort zone staying there. And that's good. But we get a little pushback of that, but not too much, because it's not like we go out and say to schools, you should do EBLI. They come to us when they're ready. So that's good. And also people, but then I think too, a big difficulty is, how is it when you have the answer to cure an ill that's so gargantuan? How do you get it out to everyone in a way that is efficient and that would work really well, and that's, affordable to all of those who want it and can benefit from it? So the challenges, finances have been a huge challenge for many, many years. Keeping the fidelity of the instruction, that has been a really significant challenge, because people who find out what I do and they really start to get the enormity of it, often want to partner or help out or, support those kinds of things, but they also want to change the way I'm doing things. They want the number one thing to be money, as opposed to the number one thing to be the best and highest for the kids and the teachers and the adults and the students and everybody who's learning. So that has really been a significant challenge, actually. I mean, to have to work with limited funds so much, I've gotten very creative on that over years, and also to have
That's a whole other show.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah. But, and people who want to help financially, but they want to help financially to get more, in the traditional make more money, and that's what business is about. This has never been a traditional business in that way to me. I don't think about, how do we that's not what I think. I think about, how do I get to more teachers and how do I get to more learners so that I can help decrease their suffering, or what they can get access to this information and this instruction that'll help just decrease their suffering. And a lot of times the education system is not very open to that. They have their way of doing things in many ways. And so that's a challenge. There's been many challenges.
So much of what you just said really plays on my heartstrings and my particular passion, which is about assisting people to connect to their mission, passion, and purpose. I'm designing a course actually that will be released soon to assist people in that. And you just you hit so many of the points that are covered in that course. First of all, your values. And one of the things that's brought you success is knowing your values and staying true to those values in the face of any other kinds of possible temptations. That's phenomenal. The other thing is that you're driven by a sense of mission. Like you're clear, you're going to help the world to read.
Yes.
And that drives everything, so that when you are wanting to scream and run from the room or put your head on the desk and cry, it's what gets you back from that. It brings you back.
It does. Because I have run screaming from the room, and many times I put my head on the desk and cry too. And so, but the pull of this being my mission and my passion and my purpose, that's what this is. It's too strong. It's, even if I wanted to try to truly run from it, I know I never could. I mean, I don't have that feeling nearly as much anymore, but just because also it's your mission and your passion and my purpose, my mission, passion, and purpose, I should say, doesn't mean it's easy all the time.
Right.
I think that's an important thing to, it's not like, it's just tiptoeing through the tulips and it's all, hunky-dory.
But life isn't easy. And when you don't have that sense of mission, passion, and purpose, then when life gets challenging, you end up sort of drifting and in deep depression. So this notion of also grace, well, you said divine intervention, but grace occurring when you're aligned with who you authentically are and what you're here to do, magic happens all the time.
Yeah.
right?
Well, and if I can talk on that a minute too, because yes, I can talk about the challenges. We all have those and everything. But if you look at the rewards, oh my gosh, and the uplift in the lives that are changed because of this work that we're doing. I mean, not just the ones that I'm touching, but then you have teachers and they're touching kids and I mean, and the stories and I've just been going through some of my files and stuff and coming up with it, seeing a lot of testimonials and notes and letters that people have written to us, parents and teachers, and the unbelievable changes, it's almost miraculous changes that have happened in whole classrooms, whole schools of children, and in just one-on-one, the fact that we are changing the world, the work that we're doing here, and the other people that are doing it, and we have many thousands of them now. We are changing the world, and literacy is, through literacy, it's one of the core ways, and that there's nothing, no matter how much you want to fire, you want to run from the room or just cry, there's nothing that can really squelch that true, pure joy of that, and making a difference and being of service, really.
It has a social impact in terms of crime, in terms of, but way beyond personal satisfaction,
Mm-hmm.
but
oh yeah,
finance, employability, family life, everything. It reaches into every arena.
And emotional and mental health of the learner and of the person. I mean, there's just so much of that internal trauma that is turned around, and that's a process too. But of the people, especially when you get into older people who are struggling, but even a lot of our little second, third, fifth graders their soul is so squashed and just so bruised and injured, and to see them blossom, that's the cool thing with our reading center too. We get to see it every day with these beautiful little souls coming through here, and you just watch them flourish. It's very cool.
It's so rewarding, right?
Mm-hmm. We actually, two of my staff right now are at a graduation for a gentleman who, he came to us at 25. He could only read the word is, and he had been incarcerated. He had tried to commit suicide. His dad actually cut him down when he did, tried to hang himself.
Oh my heavens.
Yeah, I mean, he had everything that you could possibly imagine, and he was so angry and so, oh my gosh, bless his sweetheart. But he's graduating from high school today, so from his course that he's doing, yes. And so he's now reading at a 7th grade level and loves to read and write, and so little, big, everyone in between, really making a difference. And there's just there's just so many. And I'm working also with a doctor on the other end, cardiovascular surgeon who is renowned internationally, who is only reading 98 words a minute, which is about a 3rd grade level. But he's so brilliant, he's been able to pass his boards and do all of his work with.
And he's not a native English speaker.
He is not. Mm-mm. Yeah. He came to the United States at 15.
Wow.
But he has 3 languages that he can read and write. But he's been a very quick, fast. But again, a lot of suffering. He was very shameful and very embarrassed about the fact that, this has been a struggle for him. So
there are 2 other things I want to discuss. One is, you had recommended a book called Bridging the Reading Gap, or The Reading Gap?
It's called The Reading Gap. Mm-hmm.
And I read it, and I was amazed. It was by autobiography of a man who learned to read after he was 50, correct?
He was 48 when he
48, started. And he was a teacher. He was a teacher. So the thing that I want to discuss is the fact that even into his 80s, he had residual emotional impact from the life that he had led, being unable to read. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk about how identity is tied up with the whole reading ability or lack of ability, and how transcending that is also as important as the actual skill.
Right. Well, and that is something that we see, especially with adults, but we also see it with our younger students. It's middle school, high school, but even young as 3rd grade, I would say, these children and adults, once reading is difficult for them, and life revolves around literacy, reading and writing. And so when that's difficult for you and you're stuck in a classroom 6 to 7 hours a day doing the thing that is torturous for you. And then you have to do more of it usually after school and even before because you're not good at it. And then you're surrounded by a world where they give you birthday cards you can't read, or you have a menu that you can't figure out. A lot of their identity is about this, I am a struggling reader or a non-reader. And John Corcoran that you talk about, he's actually a dear friend of mine now. I met him about 10 years ago by picking up the phone and calling him. But in the same thing, he describes it as a hole in your soul that is really, once it's there, it's very challenging to fill it up, even after you become a good reader and writer, and this is not an issue in reality anymore. Still mentally and emotionally, it's very challenging to give that up because so much of your identity is wrapped around it, especially for adults. When we have adults that come to us, they don't really expect that we're going to teach them how to read because no one else ever has, and most of them have been to everything under the sun, and then we do. And I think that an issue with EBLI with adults, quite honestly, is that it works too well. It works too quickly. That's my sense, because very quickly they become readers, and then the thinking, especially from those who I've been able to have, get back after they disappear, is wait a minute. My whole life has to change. I'm going to have to change my job. What's my wife going to think? She's always been the one that is the reader and does all the, what's going to happen? What's going to be expected of me? All of those fears, but also they still have in their mind, long after they become a good reader, that I'm not a good reader. There's a big lag there between that. So the emotional and mental piece of it, and I especially think from high school on, is often ignored. And it's really important when people, their whole life and so much time and energy is wrapped around hiding this shameful secret that they have to, and then it's like, wait a minute, you're just shifting this whole thing for me, and I don't know what this is going to mean here for my life. So I think that can be really, an issue that isn't thought of often, both by the person who's going to learn. We have an adult that's coming in today too, and I talked to the interventionist that's going to be working with him and said, you have talked to him about how he is going to learn to read, and has he thought about that, so that we're addressing those types of things, and knowing that sometimes you might feel a little angst about that because it's changed, whether it's
or a lot of angst.
Yeah.
Because everything turns upside down. So why I'm highlighting that with you is really to emphasize the power of belief and self-perception. And that's another thing that we work with the training that we're building and the coaching that we do, is to address limiting beliefs, self-sabotaging behaviors, and transcending that. Yes. And how important it is. The last thing I wanted to say, Nora, to you, is that you are proof that one person can change the world.
Aww.
And you've stepped up to that role and taken ownership of it. And you are a gift to the world for doing that. And I just want to express my gratitude to you and to say what an honor it is to witness what you're up to.
Oh, that warms my heart, Mira. Thank you so much. Yeah, it is. It's exciting work for sure. And I don't know. We just keep moving one foot in front of the other and keep moving toward doing for the best and highest good.
It's fabulous.
Yeah.
So as just parting words, do you have any other resources you might want to recommend? Any kind of particular action steps or ways that our listeners can support you in your mission?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, our website is just EBLI.com.
That's EB as in boy, LI.com.
Yep. The I sometimes gets people in it. So yeah, EBLI.com. And there's a lot, if you scroll to the bottom of our homepage and you click to our YouTube page, it's called EBLITube, if you go there through YouTube. There's so many great videos on there that explain more about the English language, and there's just a lot of interesting information in there. Another resource from our website would be to go into our blogs. We have amazing stories from schools that we interviewed, and different, stories from clients and that type of thing. Those are always heartwarming. But there's also really good informational stuff, like all kinds of books for different levels of readers. There's a great blog in there that we always send our teachers to. It's called Activities to Accelerate Learning. And it's a lot of, what do I want to say? Cognitive processing training that's movement type of things. And there's videos in there of me doing this with kids, and also there's directions of how you can do it yourself. If they work for anybody, any of us, to really improve learning. So there's a lot of different interesting things in there. So those are some of our main ones. I highly recommend The Reading Gap that Mira talked about, John's book. He also, if you want to hear his whole story, for the most part, he's got a book called The Teacher Who Couldn't Read, that tells his whole story, how he ended up and got through high school and college, and being a high school teacher of history and English and phys ed, he did for a little bit, for 17 years without being able to read at all and write at all. So he talks about how that happened, and people think, oh, that's so odd and strange, but it really isn't. There's a lot more, many educators who are struggling readers that I have worked with and taught too, both in training and at our reading center. So
Well, what we'll do is we're going to have links for everything that we discuss here on the podcast notes page on sustainabilitynow.global. And if there are additional resources that you want to give us, we'll make sure that we make them available to folks. So, Nora, thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, and thank you, Mira. And anybody who's listening, I just appreciate all of you. I love telling the story and doing whatever is possible to promote literacy and get it out there.
Great. So I just want to say thank you to all our listeners. We couldn't do this without you. You're the ones out there making it happen. And I also want to say thank you to our producer, Scott Billy. And that's it for today. I'm your host, Mira Rubin. Until next time, live your best life, love the world around you, and together we can save the world.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now, produced by Scott Billy. Visit sustainabilitynow.global for resources related to today's program. And be sure to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media for more solutions to shape a world that works.